12 minutes, I repeat. Hostiles are 12 minutes from overrunning the medic's position. Master Chief Thorne's voice rasped over the headset, fighting against the howl of the wind and the distant cracks of stray rounds impacting rock. Linh Fox, do you copy? Get to the high ground now at all costs. Solid copy, Ares 1. A woman's voice replied, unnervingly calm amidst the chaos. Winds are gusting hard, sir. Estimating force 7, shifting constantly. A few seconds of silence, then only Thorne's ragged breathing came over the channel. There is no other choice, Fox. Medevac is inbound. Just give us 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Her breath plumed in white clouds in the freezing air. The sharp metallic sound of her rifle's bipod digging into a rock outcrop was piercing. She did not reply, only tightened her grip on the stock with bare hands that were already going numb. Below in the heart of the ravine, frail silhouettes moved around 2 stretchers. 11 minutes. 6 bullets. 1 chance to get them home. The air inside the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix was thick with the scent of stale coffee and cold metal. It was an atmosphere Master Sergeant Katerina Volkov had become accustomed to, a sterile environment where life and death were discussed in monotone acronyms and GPS coordinates projected onto a screen. She stood near the back, a solitary figure amidst the tightly knit brotherhood of Ari's platoon, a United States Navy SEAL team. Their energy was different from hers. It was a low rumbling frequency of shared history, and inside jokes, a current she could observe but never truly enter. Her call sign, given to her by some long-forgotten instructor, was Linh Fox. The name, a strange fusion of Vietnamese subtlety and Western cunning, seemed to fit. She was quiet, observant, and her presence was often only felt when she looked through the scope of her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle. To the men of Ares, she was a specialist, a tool biet fii to their unit for this rotation. A highly effective tool according to her file, but a tool nonetheless. Master Chief Thorne. The platoon leader stood at the head of the room, his posture as rigid as the mountains depicted on the tactical map behind him. He was a man carved from granite, and experience, his face a roadmap of past deployments. His eyes, when they briefly met Katerina's, were professional, devoid of warmth, but filled with a clear, calculating respect for her skill set. It was a respect for the weapon she carried, and the precision she could achieve with it, not necessarily for the woman herself. He had not yet seen her under the immense pressure that forged bonds stronger than steel. "All right, listen up." Thorne's voice cut through the low chatter, instantly silencing the room. Intel confirms high-value target movement in the Serpent's Spine range grid reference 09er Tango. He pointed a laser at a narrow, winding ravine on the map. "This is a reconnaissance mission, not a direct action. We go in quiet, we set up an observation post, and we confirm identity. We do not engage unless compromised." "Volkov," he said, his gaze shifting to her. "You will take Overwatch position here." He indicated a high ridge overlooking the target area. Call sign for this operation is Silent Peak. You will provide long-range support and relay enemy movements. Your primary role is to be our eyes and keep us safe. No heroics. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Master Chief. Katerina replied, her voice steady and even. The other SEALs shifted their gear, making soft, rustling sounds. She could feel their collective gaze, a silent assessment. They trusted Thorne's judgment, but they were a closed loop, a self-sufficient organism. An outsider, especially a sniper who worked alone from a distance, was an unknown variable. Her battlefield was one of patience, mathematics, and a single, perfectly controlled breath. Theirs was one of explosive entry and overwhelming force. They were 2 different philosophies of warfare now forced to coexist. As Thorne continued with the details of infiltration and extraction, Katerina's focus narrowed. She was already there on that cold, wind-swept ridge. She was calculating the angle of the morning sun, feeling the direction of the prevailing wind, picturing the world through a circle of magnified glass. The men in this room might not understand her methods, but they would soon depend on them. The mission was set. They would move out at 0400 hours into the unforgiving embrace of the mountains, where the only trust that mattered would be forged in silence and fire. The hours between the mission brief and departure dissolved into a meticulous ritual of preparation. Inside a cavernous, containerized shipping unit repurposed for equipment storage, the air was cool and smelled of rubber and gun oil. Ari's platoon moved with an economy of motion born from years of repetition. They were a pack. Their movements synchronized, their communication often reduced to single words or knowing glances. Katarina, working alone at her own station, was an island in that fluid stream of activity. Her focus was on her rifle, which she had field-stripped on a clean canvas mat. Each component was wiped down, inspected, and re-lubricated with practiced precision. It was a meditative process, a way to quiet the mind and connect with the instrument that was an extension of her will. A young SEAL, his face still holding the last traces of youth that the military had not yet scrubbed away, approached her cautiously. His helmet had the word Rook stenciled on the side. He was the newest member of the team, and perhaps for that reason, he was the only one willing to cross the invisible line the others had drawn. "That is the M2010 Right Sergeant." He asked, his voice a little too loud in the focused quiet. "I have never seen one up close. The action on it must be smooth as glass." Katarina looked up, her hands momentarily stilling. She offered a small, polite smile. "It is. The chassis is fully adjustable. You can tailor it to fit your body and shooting style perfectly. It helps with consistency." Rook nodded, his eyes wide with genuine interest. "They call you Linh Fox. That is a unique call sign. Is there a story behind it?" Before she could answer, another SEAL, a burly man with a thick beard and the call sign Grizzly, clapped Rook hard on the shoulder. Rook stopped bothering the sergeant. "We have final comms checks to run. Let us go." The words were not overtly hostile, but the message was clear. "She is not one of us." Grizzly steered the younger man away, leaving Katarina once more in her pocket of silence. She watched them go, her expression unreadable. A flicker of disappointment as faint as a distant muzzle flash touched her and was gone. She returned to her work, her movements becoming even more deliberate. Her world contracted back to the trigger assembly in her hands, to the familiar weight of machined steel. Respect, she reminded herself, was not given. It was earned. And her arena for earning it was not in the camaraderie of the gear locker, but on a desolate mountainside 3 kilometers from a target. From across the room, Master Chief Thorne observed the entire interaction. He saw Rook's curiosity, Grizzly's territorial intervention, and Katarina's retreat into a shell of professionalism. For a moment he considered saying something of reminding Grizzly that they were all on the same team. But he held back. A team forged under his authority was strong, but a team that found its own equilibrium under fire was unbreakable. This friction, this initial distrust, was part of the process. The mountains would be the ultimate arbiter of worth. The battlefield did not care about friendships. It cared only about competence. Katarina finished assembling her rifle, the final click of the bolt, sliding home echoing with a soft finality. She packed her gear, each piece placed in its designated spot. When she was done, she shouldered her pack and rifle, the combined weight a familiar comfort. The rest of Ari's platoon was already moving out, heading toward the distant thrum of rotor blades. She fell into step behind them, a solitary shadow, trailing a pack of wolves as they walked toward the waiting helicopter. Its open ramp, a dark mouth ready to swallow them into the cold, pre-dawn sky. The interior of the CH-47 Chinook was a world of controlled chaos. The twin rotors beat against the air with a deafening percussive roar that vibrated through the metal deck plates and up into the bones of every soldier strapped inside. A dim red light cast long distorted shadows, turning the faces of Ari's platoon into grim, anonymous masks. They sat in stoic silence, each man lost in his own pre-mission ritual, their bodies swaying in unison with the helicopter's violent lurches as it navigated the treacherous mountain winds. Katerina sat slightly apart from them, her back pressed against the ribbed bulkhead. She did not fight the turbulence. Instead, she allowed her body to move with it, conserving energy. The noise made verbal communication impossible, reducing everything to a primal language of hand signals and shared understanding. To an outsider, the scene might have looked like a descent into hell. To the soldiers, it was simply the commute to work. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to center herself. In her mind, she began the familiar breathing exercise, a slow 4-second inhale through the nose, holding for 4 seconds, a steady 4-second exhale through the mouth, and a final 4-second hold. The rhythm was a metronome for her soul, slowing her heart rate, sharpening her focus, and pushing aside the 1,000 distractions and anxieties that came with flying into a contested zone. Around her, the SEALs were a study in practiced stillness, their expressions placid, their bodies relaxed, but ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. They were masters of managing this tension, of living in the charged space between absolute calm and lethal violence. A sharp jolt threw them all against their restraints as the Chinook dropped altitude abruptly to stay below enemy radar detection. Katerina's eyes opened. Through the armored porthole, she could see nothing but a blur of rock and snow rushing past in the darkness. She watched as Thorn raised a gloved hand, signaling for the team to lower their night vision optics. One by one, they flipped down their goggles. The world of red and shadow was instantly replaced by a luminous, monochromatic green. Every detail of the cabin, every scuff on the floor, every weapon became sharp and clear. Katerina did the same, and the familiar ethereal glow washed over her vision. Thorn made another signal. 1 minute. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The practiced calm evaporated, replaced by a silent electric alertness. Final weapon checks were made. Restraints were unbuckled. The loadmaster moved to the rear of the aircraft. The red light above the ramp, which had been glowing steadily for the entire flight, suddenly went out. In its place, a harsh green light flickered on. It was the only signal that mattered. With a grinding hydraulic hiss, the massive rear ramp began to lower. A wave of freezing wind-blasted air rushed into the cabin, carrying the scent of pine and ice. It tore at their gear and stung any exposed skin. The deafening roar of the rotors intensified, and beyond the ramp lay the hostile landscape of the Serpent's Spine, a jagged silhouette of peaks and valleys bathed in the ghostly green light of their vision. It was an alien world, beautiful and deadly, waiting for them. The team moved off the ramp in a single fluid motion, melting into the shadows of the alpine forest the moment their boots touched the ground. The CH-47 Chinook hovered for a few seconds, its rotor wash whipping snow and loose pine needles into a frenzy, and then it ascended, its thunderous noise receding rapidly into the vast, indifferent sky. In its wake, a profound silence descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the trees and the soft crunch of their boots on the pristine snow. Through the green-tinged world of their night vision goggles, the landscape was a high-contrast tapestry of whites and blacks. They moved in a staggered patrol formation, separated by several meters, a chain of ghosts gliding through the frozen woods. Master Chief Thorne was at the point navigating with a small global positioning system unit strapped to his wrist, his movements economical and sure. The snow was deeper than anticipated, in some places drifting up to their knees, forcing them to expend more energy with each step. It was a silent, grinding struggle against the terrain. For nearly 2 hours, they marched in this disciplined silence, communicating only through a series of precise hand signals. Katarina moved near the rear of the formation, her stride steady and rhythmic. She was accustomed to this part of the job, the long, arduous trek that preceded the patient stillness. Her focus was absolute, her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding ridges and shadows, her senses attuned to any sound or movement that did not belong to the natural order of the mountain. They reached a pre-designated waypoint, a cluster of ancient snow-laden boulders that marked a fork in the terrain. Thorne halted the team with a raised fist. He gestured for the others to take up defensive positions while he consulted his map. He then turned and met Katarina's gaze. He did not speak. He simply pointed one hand down into the dark, narrow mouth of the ravine that would lead his team to their primary observation post, and then pointed the other hand up towards the sheer, wind-swept ridgeline that was her destination. He gave a single, curt nod. It was a dismissal and an order all in one. Katarina nodded back in acknowledgement. With that silent exchange, she broke from the formation. The other SEALs watched her go, their expressions hidden behind their equipment, before turning to follow Thorne into the ravine. As she began her ascent, the faint sounds of the main team faded until she was utterly alone. The solitude was a physical presence now, a heavy cloak settling over her. Yet within it, she felt a familiar sense of calm. This was her element. Here, her success or failure rested solely on her own shoulders. The variables were hers to calculate, the risks hers to manage. The feeling of isolation was intertwined with a feeling of absolute control. Her breath plumed in front of her face in rhythm with her climb. Her boots finding purchase on rock and ice, the 60 pounds of her pack, a steady grounding weight on her back. After another hour of grueling climbing, she reached the spot designated as Silent Peak. It was a small natural ledge screened from below by a cluster of jagged rocks and stunted wind-scoured pines. It offered a commanding panoramic view of the objective area below. Methodically, she unslung her pack and began to set up her nest. She deployed the legs of her rifle's bipod, settling it firmly into the snow. She set up her spotting scope, and finally she lay down, pulling a thermal mat beneath her to insulate her from the frozen ground. Her work done, she brought the scope to her eye, adjusting the focus until the scene below snapped into sharp relief. She saw the target, a small ramshackle encampment nestled deep within the ravine. She began a systematic scan, her eyes tracing the perimeter. The intelligence briefing had stated a presence of 4 to 6 sentries on patrol at any given time. Her lips tightened into a thin, grim line. She counted 8, then 9. And a 10th huddled near a small, concealed machine gun nest the satellite imagery had missed entirely. The mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. A cold dread coiled in Katarina's stomach. 10 hostiles. At least. A prepared, entrenched force, not a simple patrol. Her hand moved instinctively to the radio handset clipped to her vest, her thumb hovering over the transmit button. She had to warn Thorne. They were walking into a killing field. But she was too late. Before she could form the words, a brilliant, blinding flash of white light erupted from the floor of the ravine, directly on the path of Ares' platoon's advance. A split second later, the sound reached her, not a sharp crack, but a deep, gut-wrenching concussion that seemed to punch the air from her lungs. A plume of snow-black soil and splintered rock was thrown high into the air. an improvised explosive device. Through her scope, she saw two figures in the lead of the formation crumple to the ground. The disciplined line of soldiers instantly dissolved as the survivors dove for the scant cover offered by the ravine's rocky walls. Then, the second part of the trap was sprung. From the concealed positions on the high ground, the very spots her initial scan had identified, muzzle flashes, began to wink and sparkle in the dim morning light. The sharp, tearing sound of multiple automatic rifles and at least one heavy machine gun echoed off the canyon walls, creating a terrifying storm of ricochets and supersonic cracks. The enemy had chosen their ground perfectly, creating a fatal crossfire that pinned the SEALs in place. Katarina's radio, which had been silent for hours, exploded into a cacophony of frantic noise. "Contact, contact, contact," a voice screamed, laced with static. "Where is it coming from? I cannot see them. Rook is hit. Rook is hit." Then Thorne's voice, strained, but still commanding, cut through the panic. "All stations suppress the high ground. We have 2 men down, 2 men down, we are pinned." The words hit Katarina with physical force. 2 men down. One of them was Rook, the young soldier who had tried to connect with her. The professional detachment she had so carefully maintained for years shattered like glass. These were no longer abstract figures on a digital map or distant targets in a training exercise. They were her teammates, and they were being systematically slaughtered below her. A fierce, protective urgency surged through her, overriding the cold calculus of her training. She could smell it even from her perch. Nearly 3 kilometers away, the faint, acrid scent of burnt explosives and gunpowder carried on the shifting wind. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady as she scanned the enemy positions, her mind racing. She was too far away for her rifle to be effective against targets that were moving and behind cover. The rules of engagement for this mission were clear: do not engage unless compromised. The mission was now compromised beyond any doubt. The rules had just changed. Below her, the surviving members of Ari's platoon were trapped, their return fire sporadic and ineffective against the superior enemy positions. They were caught exposed and bleeding. The enemy was beginning to move their figures, darting between rocks as they prepared to tighten the noose. From her vantage point, Katarina could see the entire brutal geometry of the ambush. She was the only one who could. Through the powerful optics of her scope, Katarina had a godlike yet utterly powerless view of the battle. She watched as the team's corpsman, a man they called Doc, low-crawled through the snow to reach Rook, dragging a medical kit behind him. He was trying to apply a tourniquet to the young SEAL's leg, but the relentless, accurate fire from above forced him to keep his head down, his movements dangerously slow. The enemy was not just suppressing Ari's platoon, they were systematically dismantling them. The radio channel was a chaotic blend of situation reports and desperate calls. Thorne's voice rose above it, tight with a control that was clearly beginning to fray. "Phoenix Actual, this is Ares 1. We are in a TIC, repeat, troops in contact. We are taking heavy effective fire from elevated positions, requesting immediate close air support on grid." He rattled off the coordinates of the enemy fighters. A tense silence followed, filled only by the crackle of static and the distant chatter of machine guns. Then a calm, dispassionate voice from the command center came back over the line. "Ares 1, be advised those coordinates are within danger close parameters. Air assets cannot engage that close to your position without risk of friendly fire. I repeat, we are unable to provide fire support at this time." The words hung in the air, a death sentence delivered from miles away. They were on their own. Katarina watched as a new group of enemy fighters began a flanking maneuver, using a line of snow-covered rocks to creep closer to the vulnerable position where Doc was working on the wounded. They were methodical, disciplined, They were cutting off any chance of retreat. Thorn must have seen it too. His voice returned to the radio, stripped of all formalities, raw with urgency. They are flanking from the north. They have a clear path to our casualties. All stations shift fire, hold them back. A pause, then the grim calculation. By my mark, they will be on Doc's position in 12 minutes. We have 12 minutes before we are overrun. 12 minutes. An eternity, and no time at all. Katarina scanned the terrain around her, her mind a frantic computer processing angles, distances and probabilities. From her current location, screened by trees and rocks, her line of sight was partially obstructed. She could see the enemy, but she could not get a clean, stable shot at the most critical targets. Another long silence stretched over the radio, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Thorn was out of options. His men were pinned, outgunned, and his support had been denied. Then his voice, now quiet and directed, came over her earpiece meant only for her. Lynn Fox, what is your status? Silent Peak is compromised. She reported her own voice, a low, steady counterpoint to the chaos. My line of sight is obstructed. I cannot get an effective shot from here. A pause. She could almost hear him weighing his last desperate gamble. To your west, he said slowly, there is a high ridge. On my map, it looks like a barren knife's edge. It is completely exposed, but it should give you a direct, unobstructed line of sight into the entire ravine. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Can you make it? Can you give us a shot? Katarina shifted her scope and zoomed in on the position he described. The western ridge. It was exactly as he said, a spine of bare rock and ice scoured clean by the relentless wind, offering absolutely zero cover or concealment. To set up there was to paint a target on her own back. It was a suicide mission. But as she looked back down at Doc shielding his patient with his own body, she knew it was the only choice on the board. The lives of her team against her own. The math was simple. She took one steadying breath and keyed her radio. Her reply was crisp, professional, and left no room for argument. I am moving. The moment the words left her mouth, Katarina's body was in motion. There was no time for hesitation, no time for a second thought. She shed her heavy pack, keeping only her rifle ammunition and essential data-gathering tools. Every ounce mattered now. The 12-minute clock was ticking in her head, a relentless countdown to annihilation. The path to the western ridge was not a path at all, but a treacherous upward scramble across a face of loose rock and ice. And then there was the wind. It was not just a wind, it was a physical adversary. It howled and shrieked, a solid wall of force that threatened to peel her off the mountain. It was a level 7 gale, a sustained violent assault that drove fine particles of ice and snow into every inch of exposed skin, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles. She kept her body low, using her hands as much as her feet, maintaining 3 points of contact with the mountain at all times. She cradled her M2010 rifle against her chest, shielding its delicate optics with her own body. The weapon was an extension of her, but it was also a fragile instrument. A single hard impact in the wrong place could render it useless. 9 minutes left. Her lungs burned from the exertion and the thin, cold air. Her muscles screamed in protest. The wind tore at her, trying to find purchase, to turn her into a sail and rip her into the empty air. She ignored it all, her entire being focused on the next handhold, the next secure footing. She was halfway up the most exposed section of the ridge when a sudden cyclonic gust slammed into her. It was stronger than the others, a malevolent fist of air that caught her off balance. Her boot slipped on a patch of black ice hidden beneath a dusting of snow. For a horrifying, weightless moment, she was falling. Instinct took over. Her gloved fingers clawed at the rock nails, scraping uselessly before finding a tiny, sharp crevice. She slammed her hand, in the brutal impact jarring her entire arm, but it held. She stopped her fall, her body dangling precariously. But her rifle slung across her front, swung out with the momentum, and smashed against a granite outcropping. The sound was sickening, a flat, ugly crack of carbon fiber and metal against stone that seemed impossibly loud over the roar of the wind. A cold spike of pure fear, an emotion she had not truly felt in years, lanced through her. The rifle. If the scope's zero had been knocked off, if the barrel was even minutely bent, she was nothing more than a woman with a very heavy club. She would be useless. The team would die. But discipline was a fortress built over a decade of relentless training. The fear was there for a second, and then it was caged. With a surge of adrenaline, she found a foothold and hauled herself back onto the rock face. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her hands trembled, but she forced them to be still. She quickly ran her fingers over the scope mounts, the barrel, the action. Nothing felt obviously broken, but precision instruments were not meant for such brutal shocks. There was no way to know for sure. There was no time to find out. She pushed the doubt away and started climbing again, moving with a renewed, desperate fire. She clawed her way up the final stretch, her body screaming, her mind a blank slate of pure animal determination. She heaved herself over the top ledge and collapsed onto the narrow, windswept summit. 30 minutes left. She had made it. But as she looked down at the rifle in her hands, the question hung in the frigid air, more terrifying than any enemy soldier after a fall like that. Would it still shoot true? There was no time to dwell on the doubt. To hesitate was to fail. With less than 7 minutes remaining, Katarina forced the fear about her rifle into a locked box in the back of her mind. She moved with a fluid economy born of 1,000 drills, her body screaming in protest, but her hands performing their task with unflinching precision. She slammed the rifle's bipod down onto a flat section of rock, the metal legs digging in for stability. She chambered around, the sound of the bolt sliding home, a familiar, reassuring noise amidst the gale. Lying flat on her stomach, she pressed her cheek against the cold stock of the M2010. The world, which seconds before had been a chaotic blur of wind and ice, was now reduced to the calm, clear circle of her scope. First the range. She raised her laser rangefinder, braced her arm against a rock, and aimed it at the cluster of hostiles nearest to the pinned-down medics. The red dot pulsed, and a number flashed back at her. 2,950 meters, nearly 3 kilometers. At that distance, a fired bullet would be in the air for almost 7 seconds. It would drop nearly 100 meters from the point of aim. She was not so much shooting at the enemy as she was lobbing a tiny piece of metal onto a precise point on the Earth, accounting for gravity, wind, and even the rotation of the planet itself. Next, the data. She held up her Kestrel, a handheld ballistics computer and weather station. It gave her the immediate variables at her location: wind speed, gusting to 60 kilometers per hour, temperature just below freezing, barometric pressure, and humidity. It processed the numbers and gave her a baseline firing solution. But the machine could only tell her what the wind was doing here, on this exposed summit. It could not tell her what it was doing in the valley below or in the turbulent spaces in between. For that, she needed her eyes. She ignored the digital readout and watched the snow. Not the heavy snow, but the fine, almost invisible dust of it kicked up by the wind. She watched its dance, the way it swirled down the mountainside, the way it eddied and curled around the rocks in the ravine. That was the true wind. That was the data that mattered. Her mind became a supercomputer processing the conflicting information. The doubt about her scope gnawed at her. Was this entire calculation an exercise in futility, She dialed the complex adjustments for elevation and windage into her scope turret, the precise clicks audible even over the wind. The numbers were astronomical. Then she paused. She closed her eyes, feeling the wind on her face, sensing its rhythm, its pulse. The Kestrel was a machine. She was a sniper. Her senses, honed over a decade of practice, told her something the machine could not. There was a subtle crosswind down low, a current the snow dust had revealed. Trusting her gut, she made a final adjustment, adding 2 more clicks of windage to the right. It was an act of faith. A gamble that her experience was more reliable than any microchip. And then everything went quiet. The wind still howled, but she no longer heard it. Her heartbeat slowed. Her entire universe was now the 10-inch tube of her scope. The chaos below resolved into a clear, cold picture. She found her first target, a man kneeling near a rocky outcrop, his back to her. He was not shooting. He was holding a small box-like device with an antenna, a remote detonator. He was preparing another trap. 6 minutes left. Katarina settled the crosshairs on the man's upper torso. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging and freezing instantly in the air. Her finger curled around the trigger, taking up the initial slack until it met the firm resistance of the sear. The world held its breath with her. Time seemed to stretch and slow down. In the compressed world of her rifle scope, the target was perfectly still, his attention fixed on the deadly device in his hands. Katarina's breathing was a shallow, controlled rhythm. The pressure on the trigger was steady, building by ounces. She was at the razor's edge of the shot, the point of no return. And then the mountain threw one last, desperate challenge at her. A furious gust of wind, a rogue wave of air slammed into the ridge. It was a physical blow, shaking her, and the rifle threatening to tear the shot wide. Through the scope, she saw the delicate patterns of snow dust in the ravine below explode into a chaotic, unreadable vortex. Her perfect, intricate calculation was now worthless, rendered obsolete in a fraction of a second. To fire now would be a fool's gamble. A miss was not an option. Discipline forged in the crucible of 1,000 imagined scenarios took over. She did not fire. She did not flinch. She held her position, her finger frozen on the trigger, the immense strain turning her knuckles white. She felt the peak of the gust pass over her, a roaring crescendo that slowly began to fade. She knew this rhythm. After the storm comes the lull. It would not last long, perhaps only a second, but it would be enough. She anticipated the moment. As the wind's deafening shriek momentarily softened, she saw the snow patterns below stabilize. In that fleeting window of relative calm, she made a final infinitesimal adjustment to her aim, shifting her crosshairs a hair's breadth to the left. Then, with a smoothness that defied the violence of the situation, she completed the trigger press. The rifle did not roar. The sound was stolen and ripped to shreds by the wind the instant it left the muzzle. The recoil was not a kick, but a massive authoritative shove that she absorbed deep in her shoulder socket. She held her position, her eye still welded to the scope, fighting the rifle's powerful buck. She had to follow through. She had to see. The bullet was gone. It was an unseen messenger traveling across 3 kilometers of turbulent air on a path dictated by physics and her own focused will. For 7 impossibly long seconds, there was nothing she could do. In that suspended moment, a strange and profound peace settled over her. Her part in the equation was finished. The calculations were made, the action was taken. The rest was in the unfeeling hands of gravity and ballistics. Down in the ravine, nothing changed. 1 second, 2, 3. The men of Ares' platoon were still pinned down, fighting for their lives. 4, 5, 6. The target was still kneeling, oblivious. 7. Through the scope, Katerina saw the remote detonator in the man's hands simply cease to exist. It vaporized into a cloud of black plastic and shattered electronics. A dark, ugly hole blossomed in his upper chest, and he toppled over into the snow, a puppet with its strings cut. The shot had been true. Her rifle, her skill, her instinct, they had not failed her. A new sound reached her on the radio, Thorne's voice laced with disbelief and awe. "Shot out target down, Fox, that was you." But there was no time for acknowledgement. Down below, the enemy fighters who had been advancing on the medics jerked to a halt. They were confused, then horrified, and then they all looked up, their faces turning toward the high ridges. They did not know exactly where she was, but they knew the direction the angel of death had come from. She had saved her team from one threat, only to make herself the primary target for every other gun on the mountain. The enemy's confusion lasted only a few seconds. It was replaced by a coordinated, furious response. A hail of machine gun fire erupted from the ravine, aimed not with precision, but with sheer volume towards the western ridge. Bullets zipped and cracked through the air high above her, a storm of angry, unseen hornets. It was suppressive fire meant to keep her head down while their own marksmen got into position. Katerina had already worked the bolt on her rifle, the hot brass casing of the spent round, ejecting and skittering across the rock before vanishing over the edge. A fresh, cold cartridge slid smoothly into the chamber. She was already scanning for the next most critical threat. The first shot from the counter-sniper came without warning. There was the sharp, unmistakable crack of a supersonic bullet passing just inches from her head, followed an instant later by the sound of the rifle shot itself echoing from across the valley. A shower of granite fragments exploded from the rock ledge right beside her face, stinging her cheek. She dropped flat, pressing her body so low against the mountain, she felt as if she were trying to merge with the stone. Another shot struck the rock just above her, whining as it ricocheted off into the sky. He had her position bracketed. He was good. He was patient. There was no room for fear. Fear was a paralyzing luxury. In its place was a cold, razor-sharp focus. Her mind and body shifted from a state of calculated patience into one of predatory instinct. This was her world, a deadly duel fought over kilometers of empty space. She began a systematic sweep of the opposite rock face, her scope moving in tiny, controlled increments. She was not looking for a man. She was looking for a shadow that was too dark, a shape that was too perfect, or the brief telltale flicker of a muzzle flash. As she hunted, Thorne's voice crackled in her ear. The awe from moments before replaced by a desperate, hopeful urgency. Linh Fox DUSTOFF is inbound. Medevac has been cleared. Estimated time of arrival is 5 minutes. Can you keep their heads down? Just give us 5 more minutes. The words were a lifeline. 5 minutes. It was no longer an indefinite fight for survival. It was a concrete objective, a measurable task. The knowledge settled her, focusing her will into a single sharp point. Her breath was steady. Her hands, despite the biting cold, were as still as the rock beneath them. She continued her scan, and then she saw it. From a dark crevice between 2 enormous boulders almost perfectly concealed came a tiny pinprick of orange-white light. The enemy sniper's muzzle flash. It was there for less than 1/10 of a second, but for her it was as bright and clear as a lighthouse beacon. She had him. She did not wait for him to fire again. In a single fluid motion, she shifted her rifle, made a lightning-fast calculation for the new range and the slight change in wind angle, and settled her crosshairs directly on the source of that flash. The entire process took less than 3 seconds. Her second shot was not the product of long, careful deliberation like the first. but an act of pure, trained reflex. She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. She held her position, her eye glued to the scope, watching the unseen bullet traverse the vast, empty space. Through the magnified optics, she saw the enemy's rifle barrel jerk violently upwards towards the sky as the round found its mark. Then the rifle and the man holding it vanished back into the darkness of the crevice. The return fire aimed at her position ceased instantly. She had won the duel. She had bought them breathing room, but the clock was still ticking. 4 minutes and 30 seconds remained, and below the silenced sniper was not the only threat. The rest of the enemy force was still advancing. With the immediate threat of the sniper gone, the enemy infantry resumed their assault with renewed ferocity. They had learned a costly lesson: to remain stationary was to become a target for the ghost on the mountain. Now they moved in small, dispersed fire teams, bounding from cover to cover their approach, a multi-pronged attack designed to overwhelm the defenders and Katarina's single rifle from all sides. She had 4 rounds left in her magazine, 4 chances to keep a dozen men from slaughtering her team. Her mind, now operating in a state of heightened crystalline clarity, began the brutal calculus of target prioritization. She ignored the riflemen providing general suppressive fire. She was looking for the linchpins. Her scope swept across the battlefield and settled on a man struggling to set up a heavy machine gun at the mouth of the ravine. If he got that weapon firing, he could cut off any escape route for Ares' platoon. He became the target of her 3rd shot. She fired, and the heavy weapon fell silent before it had a chance to speak. 3 rounds left, 3 minutes on the clock. In the distance, beneath the howl of the wind, a new sound began to emerge. It was faint at first, a deep rhythmic pulse that was more felt than heard. Whump, whump, whump. The sound of salvation, the approaching Black Hawk helicopter. The noise grew steadily, a metronome counting down the final desperate moments, feeding a surge of adrenaline into her exhausted limbs. Another enemy team was making progress on the left flank. One man was clearly in charge, using hand signals to direct the others. A leader. Taking him out would sow confusion and stall their advance. Her crosshairs found him. Her 4th shot rang out. The leader fell, and his small squad instantly faltered, diving for cover without direction. 2 rounds left, 2 minutes. The sound of the helicopter was louder now, a definite, powerful chopping that echoed off the rock walls. The enemy could hear it too. Their movements became more frantic, more desperate. One man broke cover, making a mad dash for the position where Doc was still shielding the wounded. He was a direct, immediate threat. Her 5th shot was almost an afterthought, a reflexive action to eliminate a danger. The running figure stumbled and fell, his momentum carrying him into a snowdrift. 1 round left, 1 minute. Her magazine was nearly empty. Her body was screaming from the cold and the strain. Below, one final enemy fire team, using a covered, sunken path, was dangerously close. They were screened from her direct line of fire by a rock overhang. She could not get a clean shot. But she could see something else. Directly above their concealed path, the mountain held a massive, unstable cornice of snow groaning under its own weight, barely clinging to the cliff face. An idea born of desperation and genius flashed in her mind. She shifted her aim, ignoring the men entirely. Her target was no longer a person, but a point in space, a weak spot in the ice and snow 20 feet above the enemy's heads. With her last bullet, she fired. The impact was small, almost insignificant. But it was enough. A web of cracks instantly radiated from the bullet hole. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, guttural groan, the entire ledge of snow gave way. A thundering white wave of snow, ice, and rock cascaded down the mountainside directly into the sunken path. It was not a massive avalanche, but it was more than enough. The fire team vanished under the deluge. Their route was sealed, their assault broken. As the white dust began to settle, the sound of the rotors became a deafening, all-consuming roar. A massive, dark gray shape, a UH-60 Blackhawk, swept over the ridge, its powerful downdraft, blasting Katarina with a whirlwind of snow. The side doors were wide open, revealing the silhouettes of the gunners ready at their weapons. The cavalry had arrived. The arrival of the Black Hawk transformed the battlefield. Its powerful rotor wash blasted the ravine with a localized blizzard, creating a chaotic swirl of white that offered a precious, fleeting concealment. A thick rescue hoist line snaked down from the helicopter's belly, a lifeline dropped from the heavens. The fight, however, was far from over. The remaining enemy combatants, enraged and desperate, knew this was their last chance. They ignored the pinned-down SEALs and concentrated all their remaining firepower on the hovering helicopter. Bullets sparked and pinged against its armored fuselage. It was a race against time. Could the crew extract the wounded before the aircraft sustained critical damage? The helicopter's crew answered with overwhelming force. The M134 minigun mounted in the side door erupted with a sound not like a normal machine gun, but like a terrifying high-pitched buzzsaw ripping through the fabric of the sky. It spewed a torrent of tracers into the enemy positions, shredding rock and ice, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. Simultaneously, the SEALs on the ground threw smoke grenades. Thick plumes of purple and yellow smoke billowed up, further obscuring the scene in a foul, acrid fog. From her lonely perch, Katarina watched the entire drama unfold. Her magazine was empty. Her role as a shooter was over. For a brief, agonizing moment, a feeling of utter helplessness washed over her. She was a spectator to the most critical phase of the operation. But the feeling was instantly suppressed by the cold voice of her training. If you cannot shoot, you observe. If you observe, you report. Stay in the fight. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, no longer searching for targets for her own rifle, but for threats to the helicopter. Her high ground gave her an unparalleled view, allowing her to see things the crew, blinded by smoke and the chaos of the immediate vicinity, could not. And she saw it. From a small dark cave opening high on the opposite cliff face, a position that had been dormant for the entire battle, a lone figure emerged, moving with deliberate haste. He was carrying a long tube on his shoulder, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He knelt, taking aim at the Black Hawk's broad, vulnerable side. He was invisible to the gunners. He was out of the line of sight of the team below. She was the only one who could see him. Hartsigsters Ares 1, this is Linh Fox. Her voice cut through the radio channel, calm and precise, a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Be advised, I have eyes on an RPG gunner east side of your position in the cave mouth, grid 39er kilo. She was reading the coordinates directly from the markings in her scope's reticle. There was no verbal acknowledgement from the helicopter crew, only an immediate violent reaction. The minigun fell silent for a half-second as it swiveled, then unleashed its full fury on the coordinates she had provided. The rock face around the cave dissolved under the onslaught of thousands of rounds per minute. The rocket-propelled grenade launcher, its operator, and the threat they posed were simply erased from the mountainside before a shot could even be fired. Down below, the hoist had completed its work. The two stretchers bearing the wounded SEALs were inside the helicopter. A crewman gave a thumbs-up signal. Thorne's voice, tight with relief and adrenaline, came over the net. DUSTOFF is complete. The package is secure. All Ares elements, we are moving to the secondary extraction point. Go, go, go. The battle for the ravine was over. The race for survival had just begun. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Phoenix was a study in contrasts. Outside the vibrating shell of the Black Hawk, the majestic snow-covered peaks slid by under a serene morning sky. Inside it was a cramped, chaotic world of controlled urgency. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sharp chemical smell of antiseptic, and the fumes of hot jet fuel. The corpsman worked tirelessly over the two wounded men, his movements swift and sure amidst the clutter of medical supplies and discarded wrappers. The rest of Ari's platoon were slumped in the troop seats, lining the cabin walls, their post-battle silence a heavy blanket. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. They were alive, but the cost of survival was etched on their grim, weary faces. Katarina had found a small space for herself on the floor, separate from the others. After reloading her rifle with a fresh magazine, she began her post-mission ritual, a meticulous field stripping and inspection of her weapon. It was a grounding process, a familiar sequence of actions that helped her wall off the storm of emotions that threatened to surface. Her hands, though scraped raw and still numb with cold, moved with a surgeon's steadiness. She was back in her professional shell, a technician caring for her tools. She was so focused on her work that she did not at first notice the eyes on her. It was Rook, the young SEAL. He was pale and obviously in great pain, an intravenous line already feeding fluids into his arm, but he was conscious. His gaze was fixed on her, clear and unwavering. Then, with a visible wince of effort that tightened the lines on his face, he lifted his free hand from the stretcher. It was a slow, deliberate gesture, an offering in the midst of the chaos. He was reaching for her. Katarina paused, her hands stilling on the rifle's bolt assembly. She looked from his outstretched hand to his face. In this environment of hard men and unspoken rules, such a gesture was startlingly out of place. It was a breach of the unspoken protocol of professional distance. Hesitantly, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was surprisingly warm against her own, which was still icy from hours of exposure on the windy ridge. His grip was weak, but it was firm with intent. The simple human contact was a shock to her system, a warmth that seemed to bypass her frozen exterior and touch something deeper within. It was the first time a member of the team had broken through her isolation, not with words of suspicion or curiosity, but with a simple, silent act of connection. He leaned his head back against the stretcher, his eyes still locked on hers. His voice, when it came, was a raw, quiet rasp, barely audible over the deafening roar of the helicopter's turbines. "You," he said, his voice cracking. "You gave us a chance to go home." The words landed with more force than any bullet. They were not a thank you for a job well done. They were a profound acknowledgement of the gift she had given them. This was the currency of their world, more valuable than any medal, more meaningful than any official citation. This was her true reward. A lump formed in her throat, and for once she did not know what to say. She simply tightened her grip on his hand and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Across the cabin, Master Chief Thorne had been watching the entire exchange. His face, usually an unreadable mask of command, was different. The skepticism was gone. The professional distance had vanished. In its place was a look of deep, unambiguous, and profound respect. The invisible wall between Katarina and Ari's platoon had finally come down. The Black Hawk touched down on the landing pad at Forward Operating Base Phoenix as the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the eastern sky. The moment the wheels hit the tarmac, the side doors were thrown open and a waiting medical team swarmed the aircraft efficiently, transferring the two wounded SEALs to stretchers and rushing them towards the base clinic. The rest of Ari's platoon disembarked, with the slow, heavy movements of men running on empty. Each step was a conscious effort against the crushing weight of their gear and the deeper, more profound weight of exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained them through the firefight and the frantic extraction was gone, leaving a hollow ache in their muscles and a quiet, haunted look in their eyes. The warm, humid air of the base felt strange and foreign after the biting cold of the mountains. They moved like ghosts through the familiar routines of their return. They turned in their weapons at the armory, their movements stiff and robotic. They dropped their mud-caked, snow-dusted gear in the storage containers. The easy, boisterous camaraderie that had defined them 36 hours earlier was absent, replaced by a subdued, almost solemn silence. They had left a part of themselves on that mountain and brought something heavy back in its place. Finally, they gathered in the same briefing room where the mission had begun. It was stuffy and smelled of disinfectant now. A grim-faced intelligence officer stood by the map, ready to receive their immediate after-action report. All eyes were on Master Chief Thorn. He stood straight, his exhaustion masked by an iron will, and delivered his report. His voice was a flat monotone, sticking to the facts in the dry, precise language of the military. He detailed the insertion, the discrepancy in the intelligence reports, the initiation of contact, the ambush, the casualties, and the successful medical evacuation under heavy fire. He omitted nothing, but his tone was devoid of emotion. It was a clinical recitation of events. When he finished detailing the extraction, he paused. The room was utterly silent. He slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping past the other men, to find Katarina, who stood as she always did near the back of the room. He looked directly at her, and for a long moment held her gaze. The intelligence officer leaned forward, expecting more details, but Thorn's focus was entirely on her. "Sergeant Volkov," he said, his voice clear and steady, breaking the silence, "completed her mission." He said nothing more. He offered no embellishment, no dramatic account of her impossible shots, no flowery praise. He did not need to. In that simple declarative statement, and in the unwavering look of absolute respect he gave her, he said everything. It was a soldier's acknowledgement to another soldier, the highest praise he was capable of giving. A slow wave of relief washed over Katarina, so profound it almost buckled her knees. She had not realized until that moment how much she had needed to hear it. Not for glory, not for praise, but for the simple professional validation from a man like Thorn. It was enough. The debriefing was dismissed. As the men began to file out of the room, weary and broken, something had fundamentally changed. As Grizzly, the burly SEAL who had been so dismissive before, passed her, he stopped. He met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was an apology and a sign of respect, all in one. Another member of the team, a man she knew only as Axe, gently touched her shoulder as he walked by. The small gestures were a tectonic shift. The invisible wall had not just been breached. It had been dismantled piece by 6 well-placed bullets and a will of iron. For the first time, she was not just with Ari's platoon. She was one of them. Later, after a mandatory medical check and a dismissive wave at the suggestion of sleep, Katarina found her way to the quiet solitude of the weapons maintenance workshop. The rest of the base was beginning to stir with the routines of a new day, but here, surrounded by racks of silent, waiting steel, there was peace. A single wide shaft of early morning sunlight cut through the dusty air, illuminating the workbench, where she carefully laid out the pieces of her M2010 rifle. The ritual was as familiar as her own breathing. She worked slowly, methodically, her hands moving with an ingrained grace. Each component, the heavy bolt, the delicate firing pin assembly, the long rifled barrel, was cleaned of the grime and residue of combat wiped down with solvent and coated with a thin protective layer of oil. This was more than just maintenance. It was a meditation. It was how she processed the violent chaos of the preceding hours, imposing order on memory, one carefully cleaned piece at a time. Each part she held was a tangible link to the life and death decisions made on that frozen, windswept ridge. She was so lost in the task that she did not hear the door open, nor the quiet footsteps that approached. She only noticed when a thick ceramic mug, steaming and fragrant, was placed gently on the bench beside her. Katerina looked up, startled. It was Master Chief Thorn. He said nothing. His face, washed clean of the dirt of the mission, was calm. He simply looked at her, then at her rifle, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He then moved to the other end of the long workbench, uncased his own service rifle, and began the exact same ritual of cleaning and maintenance. A profound understanding, deeper than any words could convey, settled over Katerina. He was not there to talk, to debrief, or to offer praise. He was there to share the silence. He was acknowledging, in the only way a man like him knew how, the unseen burden that all soldiers carry after a mission like theirs. It was an act of quiet communion, a recognition that they were bound by an experience that no one else on this base could possibly comprehend. It was the highest form of respect, an invitation into the inner circle, that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with a shared, unspoken truth. Katerina looked from Thorn back to her own work. She picked up a soft, oiled cloth and began polishing the rifle's stock. The warmth from the coffee mug seeped into her cold hands. The only sounds in the workshop were the soft, rhythmic whisper of cloth on metal and the gentle click of parts being fitted back together. They sat there for a long time, two soldiers working in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The mission was over. The wounded were safe. No medals had been mentioned, no parades planned. Her victory was not written in a citation, but in the quiet gratitude of a young soldier's touch, and in the shared silent ritual with the leader who had once doubted her. Here, in the quiet light of a new day, the silent hero had finally found her place. In that quiet workshop, bathed in the morning light, lies the heart of this story. It suggests that the truest measure of heroism is not found in the thunder of battle or the glory of a medal, but in the silent moments of profound competence under immense pressure. It is about the quiet calculus of an impossible shot, the shared burden in a room filled with unspoken understanding, and the simple, powerful acknowledgement from a life saved. You gave us a chance to go home. This narrative was crafted to be more than just a war story. It is an exploration of character, a tribute to the quiet professionals whose victories are measured not in headlines, but in the lives they protect. It finds value in the courage that does not need an audience, and the dignity that is maintained when no one is watching. We believe these stories are essential as they challenge us to look for the heroes who walk among us every day. Those who master their craft, face down their fears, and choose to do what is right simply because it is right. We are deeply committed to exploring these themes of quiet strength and unspoken integrity. If this journey into the heart of silent courage resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe. By doing so, you become part of a community that champions these deeper narratives, ensuring that more stories, like Katerina's stories of substance, character, and profound humanity, can continue to be told. Thank you for sharing this space with us. We look forward to the next story.